basketball lovers, I want to dive into your basketball history. What were some of your favorite basketball moments growing up?
So I grew up in New York. I grew up as a Knicks fan. I'm totally neutral now to 30 teams, but I did grow up as a Knicks fan. And I would say I was a young kid at the time, but those two Knicks championships, I guess, the 69, 70s, 72, 73 teams, I grew up idolizing Walt Clyde Frazier, Dave DeBusschere, Bill Bradley, just that team. I loved, Earl the Pearl, and what was so wonderful is then when I got to the league all those years later, I became friends with those people. Walt Frazier is still calling games, as you guys know, for the Knicks to this day. And so it's amazing that those guys are such fixtures still. Obviously we lost Dave DeBusschere, who was a wonderful guy, but, there's a school now that is named after Earl Monroe that was created in a high school in New York City. So that's where I think I developed my love of the game. I then went on to Duke University, and coincidentally, I mentioned Coach K before. I started there the same year he became the Duke coach all those years ago.
Wow.
And it was hard not to fall in love with college basketball going to Duke. So I was really more of a pro fan growing up, but then became a college basketball fan too. And so I was a very, very mediocre player, but I more of a just playing with my friends as a kid. But I've always loved everything about the game. I think that one of the things that I find most attractive is this blend of individuality. You in our league, I mean, you're not going to win certainly a championship unless you have talent that transcends the league in many ways. A top player, or maybe even one of the top two of the top players in the league to win championships. But at the same time, it's a team game, and even the very best players, the Michaels, LeBrons, the Kobes, et cetera, would still say, I couldn't have won without those great teammates. Yeah. And so to me, I analogize it a lot to life in ways, that T-shirt says basketball is life. I mean, I think that those skills that are complementary of each other, look at you guys are like a team, in the way you come together. You maybe need one more.
We always got a spot.
For the roster, but it's I think it's one of the reasons it's so attractive internationally, that when you think about the values of the game, that again, there's the individual aspect, but you also have to subjugate yourself to the greater good. You have to pass the ball, you have to make your teammates better, but also you're not going to be successful without perseverance, hard work, respecting the game. I think look what's happening in the women's game right now.
Yes.
Long overdue. We developed or started the WNBA. This is going to be the 29th season. We stuck with that, but great. And I'm seeing that not just in the United States, but all around the world, where people really talk about celebrating the women's game now. Yeah. More below the rim, obviously, than the men's game. But, a lot of crossover fans who love both leagues, but lots of people just love the WNBA or love the women's college game. And so that's fantastic to see as well.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about the length of the season. Are 82 games too traditional to kind of go away from, or is change not out of the realm of possibility?
So I'll begin by saying, well, on one hand, I think tradition is very important. You do have to change with the times, and that's been my approach to most things here, which is nothing's off the table. I wouldn't say, some people say, well, you can't change the number of games or the format of the games because it'll impact the historical records. I mean, I think just with any business, you have to be willing to change if appropriate and not just be wedded to the past. Having said that, that's not where I am in terms of 82 games. I think and Andre Iguodala, former champion and all-star and now executive director of the Players Association, he makes the point that part of winning in this league is back to that perseverance I mentioned, but it's that ability to play 82 games. It's not, I don't think it's talked about enough. There is an endurance aspect to being successful in this league. And in terms of, working through an 82-game season and working at the kinks in your team and, developing as the season goes on. And so, I certainly worry about injuries. I think that's my biggest concern. And I think if there was better data, or there was data that suggested that 82 games as opposed to 72 games causes more injuries, I think we would be thinking more seriously about a change. It is true, if you're playing in a game, you're more likely to get injured than if you're not. But that's very different than sometimes this notion that you're more likely to get injured at games 60 through 82 as opposed to games 40 through 60. And there's no data that suggests that. In fact, what we're seeing is most recently we have a higher rate of injuries early in the season. And I think that may go to, all the discussion about load management. It may be, and the data isn't conclusive, but it may be the case that because guys don't have enough load going into the season, that there's a lot of training over the summer, but a lot of it is, either weight training or individual training, and not 5-on-5, where they're really, pushing themselves physically. And then what you see sometimes with some of the players is they don't go hard in the preseason, because I get it, it's the preseason, and then they ramp up quickly in the regular season, and that's where you tend to see more injuries. So again, one of the greatest concerns of this league is losing star players to injury, or any player for that matter. So we're very focused on that. But and I get it, 82 games. I don't want to pretend there's some magic around that. It's just where we evolved to as a league. But that goes back many decades. So I want to, if we were ever to change it, I'd want to be very deliberate about why we were doing it, because it's a business too, and no doubt that would have an economic impact on us. But at least now, I'm pretty comfortable with it, and I sort of buying into what Andre is saying as well, that part of winning a championship in this league is demonstrating your ability to perform at a high level over a long period of time.
I think that's well said.
Last question before we get you back on your super busy schedule. Back in 2019, you guys incorporated the flattened odds for the lottery, and that kind of shifted the way teams kind of viewed the idea of tanking. Also, you guys incorporated the play-in tournament, which we see normally before that, mid-March, we saw teams kind of fold the cards a little bit, and that has no longer happened. Do you think that flattening those odds have really impacted the way tanking or things like that have happened around the league?
The short answer is I think it's helped. It's not a perfect solution. You mentioned some of the other elements. Certainly the 65-game threshold for awards. I think the player participation policy, particularly in national games, insisting that guys play, and then, creating more incentive for competition with the in-season tournament, now known as the Cup, and then, of course, the play-in, where in some ways, that's more effective than we thought it would be, because we always knew it would keep some teams into contention who, frankly, didn't want to move into a rebuilding mode, but thought they were out of contention because star player was injured early in the season, whatever else. And now, teams can see, Miami, for the first time, a 10th seed, obviously getting into the playoffs, that they can turn it on, and once you're in the playoffs, you're in the playoffs. So from that standpoint, I think those changes have been effective. I would just say, on the other hand, that when a perceived high-value class comes along, this is a great example, analytics tell a certain story to teams, and that is that, there's nothing like a high draft pick if you want to, change your fortunes and rebuild your team. And so it means that there's still going to be an incentive for teams, as opposed to, in some cases, finishing, not just in the middle of the pack, but sort of lower down, that you might as well bottom out to a certain extent and then rebuild through the draft. And we haven't found a better solution yet. I mean, I'd say somewhat jokingly, like the way European soccer deals with that is there's relegation.
Right, yeah.
For Americans who don't follow that, you'd be like if you were, finished at the bottom of the NBA, you went to the G League the next season. That would sure keep teams incentivized, for fighting till the very end. So it's not a perfect solution where we are. I think it's gotten better, but at the end of the day, we're selling competition, and it's a little weird too, because fans have gotten a lot more sophisticated as well. I mean,
yes.
You guys, I'm sure, are seeing it too, that in some cases, you have fans saying to teams, "What are you doing? Like, you don't want to finish like in the middle of the pack."
I
Like,
know that pretty well.
You're better off being worse. Like that used to never be the case in the old days. But the fans are sophisticated too, and they're saying, "Look who's coming in the draft. You know, you're better off finishing down in the standings." And I think at least now with the draft lottery and the flattened odds, I think teams can demonstrate it's still a true long shot. The odds still may be better than not finishing a few slots down. But that's something I have no magic solution. You know, we'll continue to look at it. Let's see what pans out this year after the lottery, and you know, we work with our competition committee to see if there's any changes that make sense.